All right, so we have today's reveal, and it is the full Art Glydesdale. So note today is October 18th. We are 29 days out from Kickstarter. And yeah, so no new cards today, but revealing the full arts. We kind of had teases for that, but nothing of... Well, no, we did see the full art Stratomoth, but this is a new full art we did not know existed, and pretty cool here. So of note, nothing's really changed about this card and its effect. So not really too much to discuss here, but that artwork looks amazing. It reminds me of sort of a combination of Vanguard cards mixed with the Pokemon VMAX, or like Vs and VMAXs. So kind of, I think it was more inspired. It definitely was more inspired by how Pokemon does their full arts and like their Vs and VMAXs. But just the way the effect and then the board at the bottom setup, it reminds me a lot of the Vanguard cards as well. So looks very, very clean there. So really like that one. So not too much else to say about that. I guess I could give my opinion on Glydesdale, and pretty much it's, from a competitive standpoint, has the same problem as all two-spirit Elestrals, is just it's a huge commitment and easily punished by all the counter runes. But definitely very interesting if the three-spirit Elestrals, or even two-spirits, become more common. Just it's an ease to attack over it. Just by expending a Wind Spirit. 5 attacks standing at 12 is really good, though. So it's a really neat card, and the 7/5 stat line is really, really nice. But unfortunately, in prototype deck format, it is just not very great. And of course, same disclaimer, I'm talking about the meta here, the prototype deck meta, and that is subject to high change with cards possibly having their effects errated, as well as new cards being introduced that have not been revealed yet. But that was my take on that one. As for a fun card, I mean, it's a really nice card. And just if you just buy the prototype deck and have it, honestly, just being able to experiment to gain 5 attack is going to do a lot as well. So, and also I can see it having a fun deck built around the Aeromare, which combos quite nicely with it. So those are my quick thoughts on that card. Really not too much to say. I don't really want to go too in depth there. It's just kind of what we've already noticed since the card's already been released. But there are actually some other cards I wanted to talk about that people got in their their prototype deck kits, the promo card. So I thought it'd be a good time to actually sneak those into this video here. So let me find one of the new reveals. There's 2 of them that I can think of. So here's the first one here, the Majursa. It is a 3-spirit fire Elestral with 12 attack and 12 defense. And of note, this is one of the prototype cards, so it is subject to potentially be changed, or already have been changed. But I still think it's fun to discuss. So let's read its effect. This Majursa gains 2 attack for every enchanted Scout, Smog, and Seer on the field. Ally Scout, Smog, and Seer cannot be targeted by attacks while this Majursa is enchanted. So quite an interesting card here. Unfortunately, we don't know the effects of the other 3 ones listed there. So, and I imagine probably like... I imagine one's a 1-spirit, one's a 2-spirit. The final one, I'm not sure, but it could be another 3-spirit. It could be like the Daddy Bear. But anyway, actually discussing the card here, 12-12 stat line is, like, the combined stat total is phenomenal. But I don't know if, like, the even split between the 2 will be that great. It's kind of hard to judge since 3-spirit Elestrals, as I keep saying, in prototype deck format meta, is the stats themselves don't really matter because they're so easily punished by card effects. So to be able to accurately decide if the even split between the 2 is good enough, it will take us not being in a format where we can safely go into the 3-spirit Elestrals. But that being said, though, the 12-12 stat line, 12 hits over a lot of stuff. I don't know how it contests with 3-spirits, but the 12 defense also isn't too bad, so you can't do any swapping shenanigans. So, I mean, that's just a big body as well. So I do quite like that, even if it isn't very meta-relevant. And as for well, actually, I'm evaluating the stat line without even reading its effect, but be able to gain the extra attack for all the small ones is also not too bad itself, as it'll help it hit over more stuff. So quite like that. My biggest question is how easily can you get the little guys out on board with this as well? As if you're just throwing this out, it's not really doing anything immediate. But if this works in more of a swarm strategy where you can get this out with some of the little bear cubs in here, then that actually will make a huge difference, as this is a big body and you're protecting all your little guys. So it's not even like your opponent can try to ignore Majursa and just hit into the small ones as well. So for that reason, I actually quite like this card. I think the big thing is that um, I don't think I can evaluate as easily as I could the Pantera, just because we don't know what these cards do. We don't know if even if this is the final effect for it either. So because of that, I think my conclusion is that it's easy to say that within the prototype deck meta, as it is now, with 3 Spirit Elestrals having the issues that they do, obviously same issues apply to this card. That one's pretty easy to say. But in terms of outside of a meta context, this looks really neat, and I'm actually really curious to see what these cards do, as this could make a really fun deck as well if we can easily get out the Earth Scout, Earth Smog, and Earth Seer, along with Majursa here. So we'll see as the reveals continue on that. So the other card that we've seen teased is Emphyrix here. 1 Spirit Fire Elestral, clearly also inspired by the Phoenix, but 3 attack, 3 defense. With the ability during your opponent's end phase, when this Emphyrix is in the Underworld, you can expend 1 fire to special enchant Emphyrix onto the field. And frankly, this card's insane. Obviously, the stat line isn't very remarkable, so at some point you do have to throw it out to be and have your opponent run over it, which is not the best, I mean, for obvious reasons, but it's also not the worst if you have some sort of removal spell, like Resting on Your Laurels, or if you're running like a Fire or Earth deck, Earthquake, or if you use one of your counter runes like Poison Tip or Shield last turn to stop your opponent. Just be able to throw out a Pyrex attack for 1 and then have your opponent attack over it sets this up to do some damage. And here's why. The fact that you get to special enchant this from the Underworld just means that you can more easily swarm the board and just have a numbers advantage. And it also leads to more consistent Ascension plays as well. Now, of course, the higher spirit stuff isn't the most consistent, but my first thought was, wow, you can just, if you can get Emphyrix into your Underworld, you can easily set up for a Blazerus and just attack twice if you can catch your opponent without any counter runes. And that is, well, crazy to think as well. It just really helps those strategies in well and might make them a bit more viable. And the nice thing is, you don't have to use this effect. So you can always wait for the perfect opportunity to use those cards. Granted, you might have some dead cards in hand, but the fact that you can wait lends more viability to that strategy. And I think the real reason I actually say this card is insane is the fact that it does not specify you need to special enchant it with a Fire Spirit, meaning this is such an easy inclusion in any Ascension-based deck, no matter the element, so you can easily go into any 2-cost card that exists in any element. You just need to run Emphyrix and a Fire for you to be able to expend for it. It is quite expensive as well, but I specifically like this more than Tadpuff, because Tadpuff is a dead card in hand until you want to go for the combo play, while just having this in your Underworld isn't, I think, it's 1 less dead card in hand. You only have the Ascension piece that might be a dead card in hand until you're ready to go for it. So I really like that. And this obviously stat line is better than Tadpuff. If you've got no problem maybe just enchanting it on the board to try to contest it. So for that reason, I really like this card. And again, note that it is a prototype card. It is subject to change. And I think the most likely change is that you have to enchant it with a Fire Spirit. But still, just having a great Ascension tool for Fire is really nice to see, and can also help get out even some 3 Spirit Elestrals a bit easier as well. And I think the best place for it right now just is as a well-timed bomb to try to close out the game. So again, I keep saying this, but I really want to make this point clear for anyone who just kind of tunes in at random parts in the video. We do not know what the meta will look like come the official set release. We do not know what cards will be changed. Therefore, this card could easily, depending on the changes, this card could easily be a powerhouse, especially if the 2 and 3 Spirit Elestrals become really good and not so easily punished. So I guess great summary for this card is it has insane potential, just like Tadpuff. I think Tadpuff is going to be one of those cards that we could easily see banned if a strong Elestral comes out that can abuse it. And Emphyrix falls into the exact same category there, in my opinion. And just to also wrap it up, for casual play, this is going to be so much fun to help fun Ascension decks. So for casual play, this card is also phenomenal just for fun decks as well. So really curious to see if they change it and how they change it moving forward. So today's reveal is actually not continuing on the alternate art train, we've got alternate art spirits here. The first one being Taratless. Note, this was posted on October 19th. I am recording the following day on the 20th just because there isn't really much to say about it. It's really just, do I think it looks cool or not? And of course I think it looks awesome. I love alternate art stuff. It's one of the appeals for me for Digimon. And this Taratless, love this artwork. Just the action pose of it slamming the stone on its back. Absolutely love it. So great reveal there, but that's not all. Let's see. Yep, we've got the Leviathan and the Zaptor. Now, I still love these, the kind of more actiony pose with Leviathan sailing through the water with the sun peeking out behind the clouds looks awesome. And then cute little Zaptor here. But I will say, I still think my favorite is Taratless just because of the action pose. And I think it's simply because the regular arts just have them kind of standing there. And Zaptor and Leviathan are still kind of doing that, while Taratless is actually like slamming the boulder down well. So I think that's the reason why I do like it more for that reason. But still, they all three of them look awesome. And I'm actually really excited to see if these actually have like a hollow pattern, maybe some kind of like foil texture type thing. That I think will make these look even cooler. Even just like a simple gloss, it'll look real clean, I'm sure, and can't wait to actually hopefully see one or even all of these in person at some point. So yeah, that's about it for today's reveal. So moving over to today's, I keep saying today's reveal like it makes a difference. It's Thursday, October 20th, and the reveal today is 2 new fire Elestrals, the first one being Ignectar. And I'd want to first talk about this one before getting to the other one, just because the next card is Ascension form, but I really want to focus on Ignectar first because I actually have a bit more to say about it. So first off, really cool, more bugs, but also not just in the earth elements. So love to see that, and I love it's like fire nectar. That's a cool theme to it. But discussing it, it's a 1 fire spirit, 1 attack, 2 defense Elestral with the ability, when you cast this Ignectar, you can search your deck for up to 2 Ignectars and special cast them in attack position with a fire spirit. When this effect is activated, you must skip your battle phase. So before we actually get into what this card does, note that this is the first time we've seen the updated terminology for these cards, as this card, instead of using the word enchant, it uses the word cast. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it yet, pretty much it's no different than how on the prototype cards it said when you enchant this. It means the exact same thing. It's just enchant was determined to have been overused, and they wanted to differentiate for different scenarios, because I mean, enchant was pretty much used for everything, and it was a common confusion point for new players. So I think switching it to cast just kind of clears a lot of it up. I was actually in the Discord when Dan was discussing this with the people in the general chat, just kind of seeing what ideas they had for a different term than enchant, and like summon was thrown around. The most unique one I saw was inscribe, which I thought was super thematic, since especially for the runes, since you're like inscribing them with the spirits and such. But in my opinion, that was too close to scribe from Magic to really work, as that just caused even more confusion, in my opinion. So cast was just a real simple way to do it, save some space in the card text itself, real easy to say, and I think a lot more self-explanatory than enchant. And that way enchant can just refer to the act of taking a spirit from your spirit deck and putting it onto an Elestral. So do like that change, but like actually getting into the card itself. So 1 attack, 2 defense is nothing remarkable at all. It really will not be contesting the board. It will not be surviving on board even in defense. I mean, I guess it could survive against a P-Gust, but that's about it. But moving away from that point, that's not the main kind of sticking point for this card. And that's its ability to pretty much get 3 Elestrals out on board when you play it. And numbers advantage on the board right away seems pretty good, because we don't have any AoE type cards that can just nuke all the Elestrals on your board. We have that for runes and Falcane, but not for Elestrals themselves. But with that being said, though, it does take your normal enchant. So the question becomes, what can you do with it when you have to skip your battle phase? And honestly, that part to me, I don't think even matters. It just means that you can't just, if your opponent has no Elestral out on board, you can't just attack them for 3 right away, which I think is an important balance point, or this will be an insane aggro card. But the whole skipping your battle phase thing, I don't think really matters, just because its one attack isn't really doing anything. It's not going to contest anything on the board. So then the big question becomes, what are you doing with 3 new Elestral bodies on board? You could say you're setting up a wall, even though they're kind of in attack position, so they can't attack your spirit deck, but each of them cost 1 spirit as well. So it's like, does it really make a difference if your opponent is destroying an Elestral to deal you 1 spirit, or just attacking your spirit deck to deal that 1 anyway? Not really. But where this card becomes real interesting is the fact that it's going to be quite difficult for your opponent to actually answer all 3 of them on board, depending on the board situation, which means this could be great for some Ascension strategies, just being able to throw out 3 on board, and as long as you can get 1 to stick, you can throw out a 2 Spirit Celestial. If you can get 2 to stick, one rule that is commonly forgotten is that you can actually ascend multiple Elestrals into 1. So if you have 2 on board, you can actually go straight up into a 3 Spirit Celestial on your next turn, which is pretty cool. Or you can just kind of keep 1 up on board, send 1 into a 2. There's a ton of options in the Ascension section, depending on how many of these can survive during your opponent's turn. So that's already pretty interesting. I will say, though, that angle doesn't interest me as much, just because we already have the teaser for Emphyrix, which can enchant itself from the underworld for expending a fire spirit and then enchanting with a fire spirit. So that one, I think, is a bit better for Ascension strategies, just because it's the 3/3 base, meaning it can kind of do a bit more on board, and it's always active in the underworld as long as it's in there. So you can kind of on demand choose to do it when you're ready to ascend, while this one, it's a bit harder to do it. Point being is, it's like, if you call this out, your opponent can start saying counter runes, and then you might want to second guess ascending, as you might run into a shield or a poison tip arrow. Versus Emphyrix, it's like, if your opponent said something, you can just choose not to use the Emphyrix and wait until you're in a favorable board position to summon it and then ascend. So that is one note, but at the same time, having 2 cards in fire to help with an ascend strategy is better than 3 cards. So it might just be that you just want all the tools to allow you to ascend that you want. So even though Ignectar might not be as optimal as Emphyrix, just having it will help that strategy a lot. So can't completely discount it, even though I think it's not as good for that sort of strategy as Emphyrix. The other thing I can think of with this card, and I was thinking through some scenarios, because I think what your opponent has on board really matters for this card. Because, for example, if they have 2 Elestrals out on board, and you cast an Ignectar without removing one of them with a rune, your opponent just no chance and runs over all 3. It's like, okay, what did you really do other than thin 2 cards from your deck? And I actually think that's an important note that I'll mention after I go over this part, is the deck thinning. But it's like, what did you really do there? But if your opponent has, even with like 1 Elestral on board, because your opponent just needs to attack over 2 and use a removal spell on the final one. It's not as optimal for your opponent. I don't think they really want to use removal spells on Ignectar here, but it's still a note that it is pretty easy for them to deal with these. Where I think this card is real interesting is when you can actually deal with your opponent's Elestral on board and leave them with no Elestrals, whether that be through counter runes on their turn before you move to your turn and play Ignectar, or throwing out a Laurels or an Earthquake on your turn to just outright destroy whatever 1 Elestral they have on board. Because if they have no Elestrals on board, this is where this becomes way more interesting, as your opponent can easily attack over 1 just by enchanting, but from there they have to start using removal spells. They would need 2, and that becomes far less optimal. I can understand maybe using a Rescue on your Laurels to get rid of the final Ignectar, just to make sure that the user of Ignectar can ascend the next turn. That seems fine. But the moment when you have to use 2 Laurels, even 2 Earthquakes, that does not sound optimal whatsoever. So that's where it becomes pretty good. And even then, it's like, if you have back row as well, you can help get these Ignectars to stick a little more, as your opponent can't necessarily attack over it if you use your counter runes. And that's more for Shield and I guess Gorgon's Gaze. Technically Tsunami as well, if you're running a Fire Water deck. Not so much Poison Tip Arrow, as most things will still be able to attack over it, even under Poison Tip Arrow. So that angle, I guess this card's definitely more situational. You kind of need to read the board for its kind of swarm to really make sense, because you really just don't want to let your opponent be able to answer all of them. That's why you would play it. The other kind of scenario talking about board presence, where I think this card is actually insane, is turn 1 if you go first. You just drop an Ignectar, spawn 2 bodies, and your opponent may be able to attack over one of them. But again, do they really want to use their removal spells on these small guys? I actually really love it for that strategy, just to kind of bait out your opponent to do stuff. And it just gives you a huge sort of like aggro and tempo advantage to allow you, again, to maybe ascend into something. Or you just spawn out 3 of them, your opponent maybe attacks over 1, you still have 2, you throw out something that can attack with a higher attack over, you have 2 small Ignectars attacking your opponent's spirit deck right away. That actually seems to me pretty good. Or even just baiting out your opponent's removal, making them fearful that you have like a really strong Ascension play that they're not ready to deal with. They don't have the cards in hand, they haven't drawn enough yet to deal with. So they might overcommit to actually deal with the... Well, actually, no, that doesn't make sense. If they have a removal spell in hand, then they probably just wait to use it on the Ascension card. So but I think that's another good debate there, is like, it really isn't optimal for them to use removal cards, so they might think to wait until you actually ascend. So that can be both used in your favor, but also could potentially be a detriment depending on the skill level of the player you're actually facing there, and also how much the swing from that maybe like 2 or 3 Spirit Celestial is versus it just getting Earthquaked on the next turn. So really just through all that, I know that was a lot, but I think to wrap up all that I just discussed real neatly is that this card definitely has potential. What it does is really strong. I just don't think it is a blanketly good card. You need to be mindful of what your opponent could do to answer it and what you are actually getting out of it, as this is still a 3-spirit commitment, and you want to make sure you're getting value out of it if you're going to be paying that much, is pretty much my point. The other final thing I have to really say about this card before we move on to its ascended form is that it does technically deck thin you for 2, which is pretty good, especially since you're deck thinning for bodies on board. I'd say that's a bit better than, was it Spark? No, not Spark. It Amp Up that does that. I kind of like this a bit more than Amp Up, just because you're having to expend 1 discard Amp Up to get 2 cards in hand. I just don't think that's very good. They're subpar Elestrals anyway at 3/3. So, but getting 3 bodies on board that your opponent might have to start answering and you can actually work with, that sounds way better to me as well. So quite like that part of it. I guess the only other, I had a counterpoint to it about the whole deck thinning thing being good. Let me see if I can remember it. I was thinking the minute you draw multiples of these, I don't like this card. I really don't think just being able to enchant this and get another one out feels that great, because it'll be so easy to answer 2 of them. Sure, there's still the argument of, does your opponent really want to answer them? But I really think that this, when I look at this card and say this feels good, it's when you can summon 2 from your deck, not 1. And you're going to have games where you draw into multiples, so that's going to, if you draw into multiples in your opening hand, it just kind of hurts, and it might even be a dead card in hand sometimes. But also, the other issue is along this line is I was expressing some scenarios where it might not be optimal to enchant Ignectar. You might want to wait. And the longer you wait, the more likely you are to draw into your other ones, meaning that you're losing value over time. So that's another concern. And really all of these just need testing. That is the biggest thing, is we just need testing to see how often do the good scenarios come up where it's favorable, you can easily get value of it, and how many times is it just either a dead card in hand or just doesn't do enough for the 2 or 3 spirits you have to use to get off its effect. So that definitely needs to be tested. And a disclaimer again, I am thinking more of the meta with this one, the prototype deck meta, and I'm going to be discussing that with the next card as well. So I just want to make it very clear that this is talking the prototype deck meta, but it is subject to high change as we continue to see these reveals possibly get some erratas for the prototype deck cards. Most likely the meta could see a huge shift, and this card might need to be reevaluated, as well as the next one. So I kind of got the whole meta discussion out of it, and I actually really didn't feel like I was talking too much meta. I was talking about a lot about Ascension, but right now Ascension still, like I've said this before, many other people said Ascension is just too high risk right now to be an optimal strategy. And since this doesn't really support any of the existing decks like Summer Winds, I mean, sure, turn 1, this and Summer Winds might be insane. Again, you need to draw it turn 1. So I don't know if it's necessarily fit into Summer Winds. So meta relevancy, I just want talking more in the sense that, this does give you easier access to Ascension, which will be good if Ascension, I shouldn't say if, I'm going to be optimistic when Ascension becomes a viable strategy. So quite nice. Obviously for like fun casual stuff, awesome. This is an instant include in like a Trifernal deck to try to get Trifernal out real quick, or even just a Blazerus to attack twice. That's a pretty cool strategy. So for fun, of course, these cards are going to be so fun since it enables strategies as well. So I think that's all I have to say on Ignectar. Let's move on to the next one. So move my webcam up here so I'm not blocking Waspyre's effect. But yep, that's Ignectar's Ascension form, Waspyre. It is a 2 Fire Spirit, 5 attack, 2 defense Celestial with the effect that you can disenchant 1 Fire Spirit from 1 Ignectar or Waspyre on your field. And if you do, your opponent must expend 2 spirits. So more burn. So it's quite nice to see more support for burn, and Dan did tease that more was coming as well. So that is nice to see that we're seeing more of it. But as for the card itself, obviously from a competitive standpoint, this card falls into all the same pitfalls as all Ascension or all 2 and 3 Spirit Elestrals as well. Nothing changes there. And even then, the 5 attack, 2 defense is nothing remarkable, especially the 5 attack on a 2 Spirit when a lot of this, like Capital hits 8 and like Leonite and Sonicore hit 7. It hitting 5 is very, very underwhelming, and the 2 defense is nothing to write off about, but I don't think that's necessarily an issue for this card. But with that being said, though, with its attack being and defense being so low, then the question becomes, well, is this effect good enough to warrant it? And with a burn strategy, yeah, attack doesn't necessarily matter if you're necessarily to hit over higher things, and plus you have removal cards anyway to help you with that. So if you just need to hit over a 1 Spirit Elastral, this one should be fine, especially under Volcanic Forge. That should be able to hit over everything else hitting at the 5 attack mark, even a Kinleo on the opponent's board. As long as it only has 1 Spirit, Waspyre 2 Spirits can still hit over it. So that's not too bad there. And then its ability for burn actually is quite interesting. Being able to expend 1 to force your opponent to do 2 Spirits is good value. It's a bit slow on a 2-body, as you'll have to spend a turn. If you're using Ignectar, you have to spend a turn, enchant Ignectar, then go up into Waspyre, and possibly risk your opponent being able to move your Ignectars. And of note, as long as you have 2 Ignectars on field, Waspyre can get 1 burn without having to worry about using up a Spirit here. And I think that's the biggest limitation for the card, is just lack of available spirits for it. Because sure, you can ascend it up with 2 spirits. You can ascend it up off of 1 Elestral, but then you don't have any spirits to do the burn. And it's like, okay, then why am I playing this card? And there will always be the scenario, sure, that just going up into Waspyre, disenchant it for 1, even though Waspyre is sent to the Underworld, just being able to do that 2 might be enough to win the game, or literally be what you need to close out the game. And in that scenario, sure, that sounds awesome. But how often is that going to come up where you need to deal exactly 2 spirits and Waspyre is going to be the answer? Because that's a very late game card, and you needed to have it in hand to ascend, so that means it's a dead card until then. So I'm not entirely convinced about Waspyre here, especially since maybe if it had a Poseidon type Divine rune to be able to Nexus Fire Spirits off itself to Waspyre, sure, that would be a pretty cool strategy for burn, a pretty cool angle for burn. But it doesn't feel like we really have the support to really get Waspyre to work, as you really need the Ignectars here. I would probably be more in... We would need cards that could actually bring back like Ignectars from the Underworld to be able to make use of Waspyre. And then on top of that, here's the other point. Obviously, it sounds most often when you go Ignectar, have at least 2 survive, and then go up into Waspyre, so you will always have that 1 extra spirit to be able to use for Waspyre's burn effect. But that requires you having both Ignectar and Waspyre to use in hand, and 2 Ignectars in deck. It seems like it's asking for a lot, and just to burn your opponent for 2, I don't think is really worth it. Even if we didn't have the issue of 2 and 3 Spirit Elestrals being too high risk and too easily answered, I still don't think that's enough payoff. So just to kind of conclude my thoughts on Waspyre, I think it is a fine card for burn. It definitely helps. Having more burn cards will never be bad for trying to build up a burn strategy initially, but I do have my reservations on how good it is with the known card pool. I do think it needs more support to make Waspyre worthwhile and a viable strategy. It just requires too much overhead and assistance from other cards for the delay having to ascend into it. So I'm hopeful to see that we might find that support. This could make a pretty cool deck of being able to bring back Ignectars to then just burn down the opponent with a Waspyre. That certainly sounds like an interesting deck to me. And then with eruptions as well, just to be able to kind of go over the top, not necessarily have to worry about attack. That sounds pretty cool. I just don't think the 2 spirits is enough yet. And so much so that, honestly, I'm more excited to try out Ignectar in more aggro styles, seeing if I can just draw into turn 1 and drop it turn 1, or even the Vysceris combos as well, or even Leonites. That'd be another interesting one. Those, actually, yeah, now that I think about it, Ketchup and Mustard, or the Condiments deck that Words plays, might like Ignectar to be able to more safely get up into the Leonite as well. I could be wrong, but in terms of just being able to get the Ascensions out into Leonite, that seems pretty good. But Waspyre, I don't know, just doesn't really excite me. I'm sure people will try it out. I just personally am not excited until we see more support that I think helps out this card. And that doesn't just include competitive play. That also includes casual play as well. A bit unfortunate. I really want to be positive about all these cards, but honestly, we're going to have some down cards. It just makes cards like the Pantera even more hype when we actually see potential with it. But of course, if you disagree and see some potential in Waspyre, let me know down in the comments below. These are just my initial thoughts. They're definitely not all the possibilities. So I would actually, if someone has an idea, I'd love to hear it because maybe I'll change my mind off of it. But yeah, that's it for today's reels. I have gone on long enough, so I'm just going to cut it off here, and we'll move on to Friday's reveals. So it's 26 days until the Elestrals Kickstarter. The next reveal for Friday, the 21st of October, was the Stellar Sluggle here. And I will admit, I'm actually filming this on Tuesday, the 25th, and that's just because I had a really busy weekend with opening the Vanguard case, getting orders packaged, and then I was actually originally planning on getting this out on Monday, but a family emergency required my attention that day, so here we are on Tuesday, filming pretty much the whole weekend's worth of reveals so I can get this video out today. So we'll see if I actually accomplish that. I'm hoping I won't, but enough about that. Let's actually discuss the Sluggle, because while we have seen Sluggle before, at face value, it's like, oh, it's the Stellar Sluggle. Looks really cool, like a little... actually, I don't know how to describe it. I do like that they really changed it up from the blue to this kind of yellow-orange pattern. Really cute there. Not my favorite colors. I think I like the blue one better, but still I like to see that there's a lot of difference in these stellar patterns as well, and that I really like to see. But what's actually really notable about it is the change in its stats and effect. So Sluggle was originally a 2-attack, 4-defense Celestial that read, when you normal enchant the Sluggle, you can move up to 2 water spirits from your underworld to your spirit deck. So really, because it costs 1 spirit and refresh you 2, you net 1 spirit back to your spirit deck, which in that form, it was fairly unremarkable. The 4 defense wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't great, and 2 attacks, nothing to write home about. So it really didn't have much of a commanding board presence, and its effect really wasn't that spectacular either. It kind of didn't do the stats very well and didn't have a really amazing effect. So 2 kind of mediocre sides of the card just leads this to really just not be a good card. But they have now changed it to a 2-attack, 2-defense Celestial, so dropped it by 2 attack. But this time now, whenever you cast the Sluggle, you can move up to 3 water spirits from your underworld to your spirit deck. And this is a notable change here, especially to the effect, because now since you have to use 1 spirit for the Sluggle, you're netting back 2 spirits, so it's pretty much Ambrosia, which for your normal enchant, so it's not, I wouldn't say it's as good as Ambrosia, but that's still a lot better. It puts it on par with that rune, so I really like that change. But also, it no longer restricts it to just normal enchant. So if you float off of this float into this off of a foamy, you can still get this effect, or really any other effect in the future that can special cast your Elestrals from really anywhere. So I really like that change. It just makes this card super versatile. And while its stats, of course, took a hit, its stats were never remarkable to begin with. So I actually think this has a lot more potential, just leaning more into that recovery effect, just making it now a great recovery tool, which is better than it having two kind of mediocre sides to the card. And where I think this will see the most play is in combo decks that need more stabilization than just Ambrosia to be able to see them more regularly, to hopefully have more spirits to be able to get off their combo and also survive longer to get their combo off. But also I could see this being just pretty good in some more control or really long game water decks, just an extra way to refresh some spirits that you also don't necessarily have to use your normal enchant for. Again, you can just float into this off of the foamy and either slow down your opponent because they have to attack over it, or you can just ascend into, say, a Capricorn next turn with this card, or really whatever you want to ascend into, or just have this out on board so you can go a bit wide and try to have the numbers advantage on board. So I definitely see this having a lot more potential, and water's a really expensive type as well. So just having this with, especially with foamy in the deck, I think makes it a lot better and the overall cost a lot more manageable. So all in all, I really do like this change to Sluggle. I think it makes it a whole lot better, and as it now focuses more on one thing than just being mediocre at two things. And I think it actually helps water with one of its big issues. So all in all, I really think this Sluggle is a win here. And as you can see, we also have the normal Sluggle, which does have the changes as well. So you can just kind of see them side by side. Definitely like the post better on the Stellar Sluggle, but I am a bigger fan of like blues and purples. So I think color scheme wise, I do like the other Sluggle, but hey, I still think it looks awesome. So even if it doesn't fit my personal preference for color wise, I definitely cannot complain that this is not a good Stellar palette. So that's really all I have to say about the card. Before we move on to Saturday's reveals, I also want to discuss the change to Aeolus here. And actually, sorry for the weird cropping on this image. I actually took this as a screenshot from Wertz's video because I, with a quick search, couldn't find this card, and I do have other things I wanted to do today, so it was just the easiest way. But because I saw it from Wertz's video, I do want to give him a shout out. He's been discussing some of these reveals as well, so if you're curious to see his thoughts, as he definitely has been playing a lot as well, has played in one more tournament than I have, so I definitely think it's worthwhile listening to his opinion on these changes as well. Link to his channel and this video will be down in the description below. But getting on to the Aeolus change here. So of note, while its casting conditions are still the same, you can enchant up to 4 wind spirits on it. Instead of it costing 1 wind spirit to disenchant to grab a 1 spirit wind Elestral and add from your deck and add to your hand, now it costs you 2 from this card. And this is a significant change because pretty much what it means is that its cost has gone up by 100%, which is huge. I mean, going from 1 to 2, it's a 100% increase. But let's talk about this well, why was this card good originally? Let's discuss that first. And it was because it was a cheap way to search out a card that could answer whatever your opponent has on board without using up your normal enchant, and no other deck had access to that. And Wind has a great arsenal of Elestrals to answer different scenarios, big 2 being Swirled and P-Gust, but still, even just grabbing an Arrowmare, Exaltair for burn, or the new Hydrake is still phenomenal as well. And since it only cost you a spirit, that's really, really cheap, especially since it didn't cost you like your normal enchant, or even expend 1 to draw. Like, I think those are all comparable actions. And Aeolus just said same cost, but doesn't cost you your normal enchant. So you can just respond to it right away. And that was huge. And it made, honestly, this card super oppressive. And all the good decks ran this card, or really the Wind package as well. So this card definitely needed to be changed, especially for a first set, as I doubt any set would have anything comparable to power level of Aeolus and just the consistency it brings to any deck. So it needed some sort of change, and this is a really rough change because it definitely downplays the utility of this card as it becomes now super expensive. And on top of that, if you even want to get 2 searches, you need to enchant it with all 4 spirits, which can be super risky because you can only use its effect once per turn. But you can also enchant just the 2 spirits, get the 1 search, but then you're spending 2 spirits to cycle Aeolus into another card, which isn't the best. You can also just put 3 spirits onto it and then keep it up there for either a Nexus target or maybe a Bag of Winds to pop runes and such. So it still has some flexibility with the card in different use cases for it. But that being said, though, is that 2 cost to search out wherever you need worth it? And simply put, it's just not as splashable as it once was. You really need a deck that is willing to spend that to get a specific card. So obviously, if we have an insane One Spirit Wind Elestral that every Wind player or whatever deck you're playing that runs the Wind package wants to use, Aeolus is an automatic include because just being able to search out your even just 1 copy of your 3-ofs, if it's that insane, of course it's going to be worth it. But with the current card pool, I don't think there's anything you really want to spend 2 spirits on to search it out, other than maybe in a burn deck just to grab your Exaltaires to just start burning your opponent down. That's like the only scenario that I can think of where this card might be worth it, but even then, I'm not as convinced. I mean, it's kind of the same argument as that I've seen running like Drataya in a Fire Earth deck, or even not just a Fire Earth deck, but a burn deck itself to grab back an Eruption for a game. It's just like, do you really want to have this card here when that's the only scenario where you really want to play it and it's a game-winning scenario, but you still have all this game to try to get to that position? Not really. So I could definitely see this being run in more of like an aggro burn style deck with the current card pool. That's not to say that's all that will be out there, but knowing the current card pool, that's the only thing I could see possibly wanting to run this, just because you can grab your aggro tools and try to get ahead and beat down your opponent faster than they can. And in which case, of course, you're fine using more spirits to do that because you're going to win before you run out. So that one I could see possibly running this, but as it has been, just how splashable it is, it definitely is not anymore at all. This is not a very efficient card. So I think this will be a better card to judge once we have the full set 1 list to see like what decks might want to run it. But I think really my assessment just kind of stops at you really just want to run it if you're running a combo deck or an aggro deck, as those two kind of archetypes I could see being fine using more spirits to search out the pieces they need to win, because typically there are either winning sooner in the case of aggro or just winning once you get the combo off with a combo deck. But other than that, I think it's too expensive for pretty much any other deck archetype, but we'll see. Moving on to Saturday's reveal, so that's Saturday the 22nd of October, I believe. Yep, 22nd, we have the full art reveal of Sonicore, and this card looks sick. I love this pose here. I think I like it more than the original art. The original art was good, but I think I like this one just a bit more. And yeah, there isn't really too much else to say. It does have the updated text to change like enchant to cast, and really the only it still functions the same way, but the big notable changes, it says now this Sonicore's cast cannot be chained by a counter rune. And Words actually described this really well in his video, but so I'm going to summarize what he said as well. So thanks, shout out to him for kind of putting it so eloquently so I can better explain it as well. Pretty much what this text change does is it clarifies an interaction with Gorgon's Gaze, because it was a bit confusing whether or not you could chain Gorgon's Gaze to you declaring the Ascension and stopping it. And this card pretty much says no, because the minute you announce Sonicore, your opponent chains or flips up Gorgon's Gaze on it, well, this says that you can't. So there's the interaction pretty much busted. So it's just a clarification on how Sonicore works, not an actual buff itself, but definitely a very nice clarification nonetheless, and just makes Sonicore still a really powerful card. And I am hoping to see that this card might be able to see more play. It is still to be determined if Ascension Elestrals are still too high risk, high reward, but at the same time, it is nice to see such a powerful card, make sure that people understand that it is pretty powerful with that clarification. So nothing else to say here. Do like Sonicore, the ability to stop counter runes. That means that you can use it right away. And that 7-2 stat line is certainly powerful for 2-Spirit Elestrals. And I'm going to kind of discuss the 2-Spirit Elestral attack cost with one of the later reveals. So I don't really want to get into it too much, as I think it's more pertinent to the other one. We kind of all know, if you've been keeping up the Project deck format, that Sonicore is a really powerful card. It just gets too easily punished by stuff right now. But if 2-Spirit Elestrals ever can be less punished, this card will be really good. So let me show off the 2 artworks next to each other. So I just like the action pose a bit more than it just standing there is pretty much all it is. Let me shake my webcam a little bit. But I think I'll move on to Sunday's reveal now. All right, so Sunday, October 23rd's reveal was Idolo, or its real name is Vysceris here, and I love this card. It's actually funny enough in shopping at Trader Joe's when this was revealed, and I pulled it up on my phone, read the card, I was like, this card really helps Mono Earth really be one of the most powerful decks that we know of coming out of set 1. Because with the Aeolus Change, a lot of the wind stuff that has been dominating definitely won't be dominating as much. It just makes the Mono Earth deck seem really powerful from what we know. So Vysceris here is a 1 Earth Spirit, 4 attack, 2 defense Celestial that reads, this Vysceris gains 1 attack for every Vysceris on the field. When this Vysceris destroys an Celestial in battle, you can special cast a Vysceris from your hand or deck to the field in defense position, or to your field in defense position. So right away, what stood out to me in this card is it does count itself to gain the 1 attack, meaning that when you enchant it, it is a 5 attack Earth Spirit Elestral, assuming nothing else on the field if you just play this by itself. And that is huge because one of the biggest weaknesses I've seen about Earth is that they don't have a 1 card that hits 5 attack. Their cards cap out at 4 attack without effects playing into it. And even like just enchanting attack Tauros is still just 4 attack. And that's something I've been able to kind of leverage against Earth players, as they typically have to commit more to hit those higher attack thresholds, which for Mono Earth hasn't been too much of an issue, hasn't been stopping it from performing really well. But the fact that that isn't as much of a weakness now with Vysceris is crazy to think. This card is so good for the deck. And the fact that you can then further scale with it with all Earth's great attacking cards is phenomenal. And of course, there is still the debate of how worthwhile is attack, but I don't think we should discount it either. As I've been saying, like 4 attack is kind of that average point now, so you really need to be hitting 5 and 6 attack to really feel good as a deck focusing on just being able to attack over stuff. So love this card. This does great against many things, and even with like a fully force being able to hit 6 attack means it can hit over Necrofs and Sorlets who are non-enchanted with Earth Spirits, which is even better. And the rest of its effect also is, I quite like it. The fact that since you're really focusing on attacking over stuff a lot of the times, and it definitely has the attack to do that, that you get to special cast a Vysceris means that you're just swarming the board. And sure, it goes in defense, means it's real easy to attack into, but what that means is for your opponent to deal with both of them, they need to have a removal spell in hand. And sure, with 2 Vysceris on the field, that means Resting Your Laurels will probably be active, but you're still forcing out the Laurels for this card, and Earth still has a lot of phenomenal cards it can throw out there, so I don't see it as a bad thing that this card can bait out that card, because I don't consider this to be like the best card in Earth by far. It's another fantastic piece that your opponent's going to want to try to remove. So just having a lot of things that want to bait your opponent's removal, I think is phenomenal as well. So even though your opponent can easily attack over the defense position Vysceris, I don't necessarily see it as an issue. It's still it's not like your counter runes are turned off because of these cards, so you still have that as an option to try to keep a Vysceris on field to continue to annoy your opponent. But also at the same time, I think this card would be too good. If it's special cast into attack, I think it hits that kind of sweet spot of balance because it special casts in defense position, meaning your opponent has a bit of an easier time to run over. But I think it kind of strikes that perfect balance where you're not really overcommitting too much with this card and definitely forcing your opponent to try to answer these, but while also not being too oppressive and the opponent can't answer it. I think it hits that perfect friction spot. So for that reason, I really, really do like this card for just in general, but especially for Mono Earth. Also of note, in one of my decks, I've been trying to test out Tauros in the side, just because Tauros can easily hit 5 attack if you enchant with an Earth Spirit against all the opponent's Elestrals, and even under Fully Force, Tauros will always be 1 more attack than whatever. If my opponent just had a Rummagem or Equalinx out of the field, throw down Tauros, it's at 5 attack. If they have Fully Force out, it's hitting 6 attack. It's always hitting 1 more than a lot of my opponent's Elestrals, and it can usually crash into another Tauros without my opponent committing a Demeter and a Scythe. So I was really liking that tech, but now with a 5 attack Vysceris here, Tauros, best it can do is crash. So that definitely hurts my special tech a little bit in the side deck that I've been really enjoying just for some fun. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I definitely think it was kind of silly that one of the best answers to easily attacking over Earth stuff is an Earth card itself. So that's another note I thought of with this card, but just again shows how this kind of covers up a weakness of Earth. So nothing really too much else to say here, though I do have to show off the Stellar version of Vysceris. Love the black and red with it. This color change. This is one of those Stellar Elestrals that I like the alternate color scheme better than the original. And I still like the original as well, but that black and red is just so lean. with the little blue visor. Ah, love it so much. So all in all, nothing really else to say here. Just love these cards all around. They're just going to be great. And I realized I was focusing mainly on meta, and I should keep my caveat here where, of course, we don't know what the meta will look like. Things are still changing. We don't have all the card text changes from the prototype start decks. But this is one of the ones that I don't think Mono Earth will be hurt so much, where this card isn't good, because this card is likely not to be changed too much. And for fun, this one isn't one of those ones that you're like, oh, I can make a super fun deck around, like Pantera. But of course, like, it's just a good card. It's going to be seen run in fun decks as well, just because it's easy to throw out. So yeah, let me move on now to Monday's reveal. So now we're at 23 days till Kickstarter, Monday, October 24th. I am filming this the day after still, since the same shirt from the last few reveals, but this was revealed on that day, and it is Ladogon? I think Ladogon. Really cool ascended form of Drataya here. And we've had this teased in Golden Apple Discord. I always thought it was like a weird angle for Drataya, but turns out it's an actual card, and I just really wasn't looking too closely at it. So really cool to see that. I love the cool like plant dragon aesthetic this goes for. And I will say I'm probably going to be a bit more positive on this card and not as harsh, just because honestly when I read it, I just needed something positive due to family emergency. And I still think this card does have has a really good effect, but I would say take this with a bit more grain of salt. I might be a bit more positive on it just because of the mindset I was in when I read this. So, but enough about that. Let's actually get into this card. So it's a 2-Spirit Earth Celestial, 7 attack, 8 defense with the ability when either player casts Ambrosia or Golden Apple of Discord, you can target and destroy 1 card on your opponent's field. Wow. Just a simple destruction for playing another card. You're pretty much just tacking it on there. That's phenomenal. And that's one of the reasons I really like this card as well, is it, unlike Centaur, where, well, as we know, Centaur, that could be changed. I don't know if it will. I don't know if it won't be. But you have to disenchant one from it. This one just kind of tacks that destruction effect onto up to 6 other cards in your deck. So the cost is, of course, you need to have those cards to play, and we'll kind of discuss those cards in a little bit. But the fact that it's just a bonus, it's a clear bonus, doesn't cost you anything else, amazing. And you can never go wrong with destroy 1 card. It's super flexible, super good. And another aspect of this card is the fact that it's linear. If your opponent casts it, you get to destroy something, which, of course, your opponent most likely isn't going to cast those cards. But then it soft locks them out of those cards. And as Ambrosia is such a phenomenal card that pretty much every deck is running, the fact that you can throw this down and say you need to deal with this before you can use Ambrosia is huge, because they just lock your opponent out of recovery and possibly help you close out the game. So that's a really unique way to kind of use this card as well. And moving over to its stats before we get into the 2 cards itself, the 7 attack we've seen to be a pretty good breakpoint for the 2-Spirit Elestrals. Of course, you've got ones that hit higher like Capricorn and Vysceris, but a lot of common stuff like Sonicore that has good effects for the field, like Sonicore and Leonite, hit 7 attack as well, so you can't exactly crash into this. You need other effects. So that already isn't too bad. And the 8 defense I do quite like, as Capricorn now can't hit over this, and I think that just leaves Vysceris at 9 attack, without assistance, of course. So I do think that's a solid stat line for sure. 2-Spirit Elestrals are a bit harder to judge on their stat lines just because they're still in being balanced. They haven't been the best so far, so we'll have to see if this analysis holds true. But from what we know right now from prototype decks, that is a pretty solid stat line. And I actually think the most important thing for these 2-Spirit Elestrals is that they can't be easily answered by 1-Spirit Elestrals. And this card cannot. A lot of times the opponent will have to commit a lot more to be able to destroy this with just from the 1-Spirited Elastral angle. Like, Sorlet doesn't answer this. Sorlet's been a huge answer for like Sonicore and Leonite, griefing their 2 defense, but 8 defense, like Sorlet's not hitting over this. And I think that's super important. It just means that your opponent's going to have to rely on their counter runes and their destruction effects, whether it be runes or like Kinleo and such, meaning it's a bit harder to deal with. So really like that as well. And the 2-Spirit Elastral kind of comparison here, this one, I would like to see how it evolves once we get the full set list, because right now, I don't think comparing its stats to 2-Spirit Elestrals is too important. And that's just because once you throw this card out, ideally you're answering your opponent's board with it, and in which case it's going to be really hard for your opponent to stick something to then ascend to attack over Ladogon. And most of the time, your opponent's just going to use a destruction effect anyway to deal with with it. So really comparing two-spirit Celestial attacks I don't think is too important, but we have seen a lot of cards that help you ascend in different decks, such as the new Ignectar for Fire and Emphyrix. So these attack stats might matter more if we see that Ascension is a bit easier to achieve and more decks are running it, in which case then the stats do matter. And again, that's just comparing all the two-spirit Elestrals, and as I kind of already said, the stat line is still phenomenal, even at the two-spirit Elestral line. And it just kind of hits the numbers that it really needs to. It can still, some of the Elestrals can attack over it, but not all of them, so I think that's a really important place for this card to be. And just having both great attack and defense means that it can easily be dealt with by cards. And funny enough, in the water deck, if you're running Capricorn, you kind of want to leave it in attack and not use your Tsunami on this one. So that's a little funny interaction as well. But enough about the attack stats. Going back to its effect, of course, it's really easy to look at that destroy one card and feel and be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But it is tailored to other cards, so you need those other cards in your hand to use. And that's where this becomes a bit harder to use and more readily get off its effect. And the first point I want to make is just with the Ambrosia, it's just a real question of do you want to use it with Drataya or Ladogon, and can you wait to use it for those two? That's always been a question about Drataya. And Drataya is not... Drataya hasn't been run historically, but also we're kind of questioning it because we didn't realize that it's just whenever you cast an Ambrosia, it's not once per turn like we thought, like some of us thought, myself included. So it definitely makes it a bit more interesting, but it's just the matter of do you want to have a card destruction on a body or do you want to draw two more cards? That's simply what needs to be answered, and there hasn't been enough testing because things keep changing. So we'll see. And another point is it's not like you have to go Drataya into Ladogon. You can just ascend it off of anything. So there is that angle that maybe we just run this for the destruction effect. So, but the fact that it kind of conflicts with the cards that can use it with another Celestial, not necessarily the best synergy, but at the same time having more cards that do gain an effect off of Ambrosia for when you have the cards, since you really aren't always seeing every single, well, you're not seeing every single card every single game, or at least one copy of it. Having more cards that get bonuses off of playing Ambrosia might also not be a bad thing either. And I do like this card also triggers off of Golden Apple of Discord, meaning it has even more targets as opposed to the Drataya. But the problem with that is Golden Apple has not seen the most play. It's not been considered the best card so far. And it's interesting as Ambrosia is just kind of generically good. Golden Apple seems better for a more hand destruction type deck, which Ladogon doesn't really play into. I shouldn't say that. Now that I think about it, it's this card existing puts your opponent in an awkward spot because they want to maybe put their cards on the board to avoid Golden Apple, but at the same time, then this card with Golden Apple can grief their cards, so a bit of an interesting kind of duality there. But at the same time, if your opponent throws all their cards, well, it's really hard to throw all your cards down in this game since if you have you can only play one Celestial per turn. So this is just me spitballing off the top of my head realizing that. But reining it back in, Golden Apple, not the most seen card, so it's one of those questions is Ladogon good enough, and you can see it enough to make it worthwhile running Golden Apple in the deck, which might not be as strong of a card, or will Golden Apple really just hurt the deck, so it's really not worth running, in which case Ladogon doesn't have as many cards to proc its effect, therefore Ladogon might not be as good either. That is going to need some testing, but I think most of all, even if this card isn't run, which I think is very iffy and it really requires some testing, I like the precedence this card sets. This is the kind of effects you want to see on Elestrals that you need to commit more to with Ascensions. It's more high risk, high reward, as the payoff with this card is definitely better. So yeah, I just like the precedence this card sets for sure. And if I were to say, do I think this card will be played or not? I think it'll be good for some more like casual decks. I don't think it will see much competitive play based on the two cards and its conditions. But again, I could still be wrong. We're still waiting to see the full set one list, and that could also end up just getting a free destruction effect is good enough to run it. So we will see. Also, real quick, Drataya did get a change that makes this card even more insane. So now it says when either player casts Ambrosia, you can draw two cards. Again, not only it's linear now, so if your opponent casts it, you get the card draw. So this can really stall your opponent out from wanting to use their Ambrosia or help you see more cards if your opponent needs to use Ambrosia then and there. So really like that change. Definitely makes Drataya more high friction and not changing stat lines. The 4 defense is all right. So definitely do like this card being out there. And the other thing is, I think more importantly for Drataya, you really don't want to use destruction effects on it. It's pretty easy to attack over, but due to the timing, you have to attack over this and then wait a whole turn to use Ambrosia. So I think that change actually makes Drataya a very interesting card to kind of put a lot of friction for your opponent. And for that reason, I actually really like Drataya now. I think it definitely has a lot higher chance of being run now with it being linear. And as opposed, my analysis still doesn't change for the Ladogon here, just because it's two spirits, a bit harder to kind of throw out here. But this being cheap and causing that simple friction, I think definitely gives it a lot more opportunity to be played. So quite like that. And just kind of showing off Golden Apple of Discord here. Clearly, that is the Ladogon here now that we look at it, or at least I look at it. Maybe some of you figured it out and I'm just oblivious, but nothing really, looks like nothing really changed about Golden Apple at Discord. I haven't read its effect in a while. All I know is the discard one to discard one card from your opponent's hand. That sounds right at random. Move top two cards from the deck to another row. That sounds like what it used to do. So just a few changes to its wording, I believe. But yeah, I pretty much already discussed what I thought of this card. It's like a 2-for-1 on your opponent. Mill isn't really that great right now. There's not enough mill cards for a mill strategy. So again, it's one of those things where is Ladogon's effect so powerful and you can kind of get it off that you want the Golden Apple to be able to use this effect more? Or does Golden Apple just hold down the deck so much that just this whole package just is more relegated to a fun, casual strategy? Decided to refill my outro here in post, but if you enjoyed this discussion video, definitely leave a like on the video. I had a lot of fun making it and just kind of throwing out my thoughts on these cards, whether I'm right or not. And on that note, leave a comment down below which of these reveals was your favorite, or really anything about the analysis I gave these cards. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why or why not? I would love to see a discussion, especially since I did miss some in the Discord being so busy, especially this past weekend. But I definitely want to try to get these out at least once per week, though unfortunately, with the family emergency not being over yet, I cannot promise that until, well, it's all over. But on that note, I do plan on posting updates on Twitter, so do follow me on there if you want said updates. But really, once this is all passed and I can put more of my focus into YouTube, I'm having a blast with Elestrals, so definitely look forward to a lot more Elestrals content coming in the future, from gameplay, deck profiles, meta discussions, card discussions. I mean, a whole bunch of stuff, even like some educational videos and helping new players with like different strategies and building decks. I really want to do it all. It's just a matter of time. So if that interests you, definitely subscribe to my channel, turn on the notification bells to make sure you get notified when I post stuff, and look forward to all that content coming out in the future.